And welcome to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. My name is Councillor Justin Wrench and I will be chairing this meeting. Before we proceed with the main business of the meeting, I have a few items of housekeeping. We are not expecting a fire alarm this evening, but should one sound, please can I ask members to exit to the side of the chamber and assemble in the car park. Please can you make sure that your phones and other devices are switched to silent, and if members wish to speak during our debates this evening, please can you indicate by raising your hands, and I will come to you at an appropriate time. This meeting is being webcasted. Please can I remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking and switch them off when we have finished speaking to avoid any interference. I will now proceed to the main business of the meeting, and agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. So we have apologies from the following members: Councillor Andy Mundy, Councillor Paul Heath and Councillor Jack Edwards. I believe everybody else is here this evening, so there are no more apologies. So we'll move on to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. So do members have any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interests that they wish to declare this evening? And please state the nature of your interest. Okay, there are no declarations this evening, so I'll proceed to item 3, which are the minutes of the previous meeting. So please can I have a proposer to approve the minutes as an accurate record of the meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee on the 25th of July. Thank you, Councillor Lynn Walters. And can I have a seconder? Councillor Bohr. So the minutes have been moved and seconded as an accurate record. All those in favour, please indicate by a show of hands. Thank you, members. The minutes are approved. I'll just take a minute just to sign those minutes this evening. So we will now move to agenda item 4, which is public question time. Members, I can confirm that there are no registered speakers for this evening's meeting. So we will therefore proceed to agenda item 5, the local audit update and BDO audit update and timeline. So this report is set out on pages 6 to 15 of tonight's agenda, and we are joined this evening by Steve Bladen, the Audit Director, and Sebastian Evans, a Senior Manager at BDO. It will be Sebastian Evans, I believe, that will be setting out the reports to the committee alongside Phil Myers, our Head of Finance. So welcome to Steve and Sebastian, and Phil and Sebastian, please can I invite you both to talk through the reports.
Yes, so thanks, Chair, and good evening, members. So I wasn't going to say too much on this because I'm sure the committee are keen to hear from BDO really around their proposals on what has been, as we know, a long-standing issue around the outstanding audits, and for ourselves that's the sort of 4 years from 1920 up to 22-23. In the sort of covering report that you've got, it just updates around the government's proposals. At our last meeting, we had the previous government's proposals around addressing the backlog, and you'll recall there was a date of 30th of September, which was being proposed at that time. I think with the delay that inevitably followed with the general election and dissolution of Parliament, that meant that the enabling legislation did get delayed. So the incoming government now have sort of picked up the mantle, and as you see from the report, they're essentially following the same lines as was previously proposed by setting a series of backstop dates. So the first one of those is the 13th of December, and that's for the resolution of all the outstanding audits up to and including the 22-23 year. And then you'll note that there are some subsequent backstop dates that have been proposed which are really around ensuring that the system can recover and that whilst the auditors are able to build assurance through their work, that there is no sort of repeat or recurrence of any further backlogs being created. So there are some proposals around, other proposals that government have made around just changing the dates. So for ourselves, the current date for preparing unaudited accounts is the end of May, and for the next 4 years they're proposing that will be to the end of June. So again, that will be helping the system reset. As we've previously discussed, there will be modified opinions, and there'll be likely disclaimer opinions, and BDO will cover that in terms of their part on this report. I think we welcome the fact that the Ministry will be making sure that these unusual opinions will be fully explained and help with understanding by those interested, and making clear the reasons why authorities will have the opinions they have. I think from our part, we've just got a piece of work to do around the 22-23 accounts. So you'll note in the report we'll be commencing a public inspection period of those accounts that were paused at the time, and we'll be starting that very shortly, and that's part and parcel of the work that we need to do in order to bring this matter to a resolution. So there's nothing else that I wanted to highlight or add, so if it's okay with you, Chair, I'll pass to Sebastian.
Thank you, Phil. So if I can start on the executive summary, which is on page 2 of our report. So this, as sort of Phil was mentioning, does cover all 4 of the audit periods which we are the auditor for. In terms of the backstop arrangement, so both of the key pieces of secondary legislation needed to support these arrangements in terms of completing these 4 audits by the 13th of December 2024. As I said, they are currently laying in Parliament, and there's no and there's every expectation that that process will be finished by late October, and for one of the pieces, and early November for the other. So the expectation is that for any audits that are not signed by the not completed, I should say, by the 13th of December 2024, there would be a disclaimer of opinion. In essence, some work does still need to happen on those years, just to even to get to the position of disclaimer, we do have to do a certain minimum number of procedures, which is set out in more detail later on in this report. But compared, I suppose, to a full scope audit, it is very limited in terms of A, the amount we have to do, and B, the onus on the council in terms of responding to audit queries. And so, as Phil was saying, the only major thing that needs to be done in terms of the council's side is starting that inspection period for the 22-23 accounts, and then obviously there'll be the subsequent reporting on our backstop work at a later committee. One thing, however, we are still required to do in connection with those backstop years, so I'm talking about the full period from 2021 through to 2023, is our value for money work. So while the changes to the code currently going through Parliament do introduce some limitations to the extent of the VFM work that has to be done for that, we still have to be satisfied before giving our opinions that we have done enough work to satisfy ourselves that either we haven't identified any significant weaknesses from a VFM perspective, or that we've done enough work to be able to confidently report that these are the only weaknesses. And so that work at the moment is progressing alongside the finishing the 2021 audit, and obviously 1920 audit. We're presenting the final audit completion report here today. In terms of the rest of the report, again, that just really sort of sets out the detail just in terms of what the council needs to do, what we need to do. And Appendix 1 just includes a timeline of when we are planning to do those things. All of these are currently on track just in terms of what we need to do to meet sort of that backstop date and complete the audit for 1920 and 2021 sort of alongside that. So I am happy to take any sort of questions, but sort of those are the main headlines. Okay, thank you. Do any members have any questions? Councillor Walsh.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Phil and colleagues from BDO. My understanding is that for the 4 years in question, we don't as a council yet have completed external audits. Can you, to step back a bit here, if I may, can you explain why that is the case? I appreciate it's a national issue, and I'm not assuming there are any particular problems, but there have been a number of concerns raised at this committee by members from all political allegiance. So could you explain in summary why we are in this position?
So there's a number of reasons for that, Councillor. I think, and each year would need to be considered in its own right, really. So I think one of the key reasons that the 2019-20 audit has been delayed for so long is there was an issue around infrastructure that was identified some years ago, and there was no audit opinions were issued for a long period of time, while auditors and other interested stakeholders, so for example, SIPFA came up with a solution as to how, as to the work that auditors would do over infrastructure assets. The council holds a number of infrastructure assets, and so we had to work through that to be able to conclude that 2019-20 audit. That did take some time to do. That work is now complete, and we'll come on to that in our next report. I think it's fair to say that, as you say, Councillor, there are a number of delays across the sector. And I think there's various reasons for that those delays have built up. I'm not necessarily saying that it's at this council that's happened, but there are issues around the quality of accounts that auditors receive, and has built delays into the sector. Issues around infrastructure assets that I talked about, and there is a issue around capacity as well of auditors. To deliver the audits, given that there is an audit that you do today is much more complicated than it has been in previous years, or as it was, say, 4 or 5 years ago, particularly in areas around valuation of property, plant and equipment, for example, and again, not necessarily at this council, but the complexity of certain councils' accounts. So many of them are involved in much more commercial activities, so investing in investment property for income generation purposes. And those issues have kind of made audits much more complicated and have built, and hence that's why the delays have come about. So I don't think it's not easy to pinpoint any one single reason. There's a whole combination of reasons for that.
Thank you, Steve. I believe Councillor Walsh would like to come back with another question.
Yes, just one. To be open, I don't find that answer terribly convincing. I mean, you talked about quality of infrastructure and accounts received. Are you saying, because my understanding, I may not always agree with the policies, I'm a member of the main opposition group, while I may not always agree with the policies of the majority group here, I believe this is a very tightly run ship. So are you saying that there was a problem with the quality of infrastructure at Braintree District or at Braintree Accounts? Or were BDO possibly, and this is a question, it's not an allegation, were you perhaps to some extent prioritising other audits? I mean, I'd like a clear answer to this issue, please.
So I'm not saying that those issues are what have led to the delays at Braintree. That's what has led to the delays more widely within the sector. So I think if you look across the sector at the moment, I don't know the exact number, but there's probably something like 5 between 500 and 900 audit opinions that are outstanding. It's coming down all the time with the backstop arrangements. But it's those sorts of issues that have led to the capacity with auditors to deal with those audits, and hence the delays that have built up within the system. I think we've been very clear to this committee on occasions that there are periods of time where we do prioritise other work in other sectors. So, for example, there is a period of time where we do prioritise work, for example, in the National Health Service. But that is a set period of time, generally speaking, where we prioritise that. And the rest of the year, we will prioritise local government audits. And I think we've also been clear that, the issues that I spoke about around, for example, valuation of property, plant and equipment that are more, where auditors are doing more work than they would have done in the past. It's been difficult for us to deal with that in some instances. So I'm not saying that we haven't had resourcing problems. I think I've been clear about that previously, that we have been. But there are a number of factors that have led to all of the delays.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bohr.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm grateful for the explanation that we've had from Sebastian and Steve on the situation. I find it difficult sometimes with phraseology, and I'm just trying to unpack the phrase we currently expect these dates to be met. I just wonder whether that's an overcautious statement, or whether there are any roadblocks or any potholes in the road that might sort of prevent this. And the second part of my question was, what does the plan to disclaim opinion on 21, 22 and 22, 23 audits, what does that actually mean for Braintree District Council?
Yes, over to you, Steve. Thank you.
So in terms of the first part of your question, Councillor, we at this point in time, we're not expecting to go beyond that statutory backstop date of the 13th of December. So, so subject to the legislation progressing through Parliament as we expect it to, we do expect that there to be that statutory backstop date of the 13th of December, and we do expect to meet that for all 4 audits. I guess the only exception that I could foresee for that would be for 22-23, where the public inspection period hasn't yet completed. If there was an objection to the accounts, we would have to deal with that objection before we could issue our audit opinion. So as of today, that's the only matter I can see that could potentially stop us from meeting that statutory backstop date for that 1 year. And the public inspection period for the preceding years has already closed. In terms of what does a disclaimed audit opinion mean, essentially that means, so that would be for 2, we're expecting that to be for 2 years, so 21-22 and 22-23. So, I mean, in summary, we're effectively saying we're not able to issue any assurance over the council's financial statements, and that's what our audit opinion will make clear. It will set out the reasons as to why we've had to reach that opinion, and it will reference the backstop date. But in summary, you will not be getting an audit report from us that gives any assurance over either the transactions or balances reflected within the council's financial statements.
Thank you, members. If there are no further questions, we're asked to note the report of the proposed actions and outcomes from the Council's audits for the years 2019-20 to the years 2022-23. Please can I take it that this report has been noted? Please indicate by raising your hands. Thank you, members. That report has been noted, so we will now proceed to agenda item 6, the statement of accounts for 2019 to 2020 and revised external auditors' completion reports and audit updates for 2020 to 2021. The report is set out on pages 16 to 77 of tonight's agenda, and can I please once again invite Phil, but also Sebastian, to set out this report. Thank you.
Yep. So again, wasn't going to say too much on this, but I think this is now just really the first stage of addressing the backstop date. So it's dealing, as you say, it's dealing with the 1920 accounts, which have previously been reported on, and therefore this is now bringing a revised audit completion report on that year, and then an update on the 2021. So I wasn't going to sort of add any more. I think through you, Chair, hand over to Sebastian to go through their report.
Yeah, I'll introduce Sebastian to set out this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I think, as Phil was saying, this is essentially an update on sort of findings that were previously reported, in October 2021 to an earlier meeting of this committee. So rather than necessarily going through all of the details originally reported, I am planning to just sort of focus on the sort of changes to that. So the main change, and if I bring your attention to sort of page 4 of our report in our sort of executive summary. So there have been two main changes since our previous sort of report. The first thing, as mentioned earlier, is around the infrastructure assets resolution, and there is more detail on this sort of later on in the report, which I can sort of briefly talk through as well. But in essence, we had to sort of work out what the impact of the sort of some of the historic infrastructure asset accounting issues sort of were in terms of Braintree's own infrastructure portfolio, how this affected disclosures, the extent of comfort that we could take on some of the sort of balances as they stood, and we didn't identify any sort of material issues sort of from this work, but Braintree did sort of follow the recommendations of the sort of statutory override, which was the option to remove gross infrastructure balances from the accounts on the basis that they wouldn't be in a position to provide along with many other local authorities, I should add, sufficient information on what is sort of very historic data. In terms of the audit report, so originally, obviously these accounts go back a long time, so year end was 31st of March 2020. There was an expectation for audits in those periods that there would be a modification, specifically an emphasis of matter, in our opinion, in relation to the impact of COVID-19. And this is on the basis of the impact of COVID-19 on sort of property, plant and equipment valuations and on assets in sort of the pension assets forming part of the net pension liability. And this is on the basis that the valuers for property, plant and equipment, and also for sort of pension fund investments, were citing material valuation uncertainties, mainly based on the sort of uncertain sort of market conditions as at 31st of March 2020. Obviously, the world has changed since then, and so we have determined that these no longer present an uncertainty, mainly on the basis of the passage of time. If we turn to the next page, or page 5 of the report, so again, this hasn't actually changed since our last report, but I thought it was just worth recapping the overall sort of, I suppose, level of unadjusted misstatements arising from our audit. These represented a figure of sort of 12% of overall materiality, and on the basis that these are not material, the Council does not propose adjusting for these findings. And in terms of other sort of slight changes to mention, so on sort of page 6 of other matters, just referring to the fact that the Council has adopted the statutory override in respect to infrastructure assets And again, this is in line with what the majority of local authorities have had to do in relation to historic infrastructure balances. In terms of the main detail of the report, so fundamentally our audit risks haven't changed since the previous audit, and so I'm not proposing to talk through the sort of detail of those unless there's any sort of specific questions. I will, however, speak through the infrastructure pages, which is page 18 onwards, just, I suppose, a bit of a recap on sort of why this was a major issue and sort of the extent of work I think that had to be performed on this. So essentially, the issue with infrastructure assets is that in many cases the financial information sort of supporting these is either very old, or when it was sort of the time it was transferred, it was, I suppose, not necessarily supported by lots of sort of detailed information whereby you could say break down and see what the costs are made up of. Now, in practical terms, this would necessarily sort of make a significant difference, but in accounting terms, it does mean that it's difficult to establish, when, say you have a road, for example, it's difficult to establish when you are replacing, say you're adding additional layers of sort of tarmac, for example, to a road, it's very difficult to establish actually how much of the original sort of tarmac is still there for accounting purposes. It basically means it's hard to remove spend that was originally incurred. It's hard to separately identify that in terms of removing it from the fixed asset register. And these balances were highly material to Braintree, so we're talking 6 million in the sort of gross balances in the balance sheet. And so, in essence, we had to look into more detail just to understand actually how much information did the council have over these more historic assets, and the extent to which we could be comfortable that the net book value was materially correct, given these information deficits. So we did perform some additional work on this, which is set out sort of 2 pages later. Essentially, sort of sample testing the fixed asset register specifically for infrastructure assets that the council held. And whilst we didn't find any sort of explicit errors in terms of how they've been accounted for, we did find there were situations actually where there wasn't information available to support of how the sort of costs for the assets had originally sort of been established. We did, however, find that the use of economic lives used by the council for infrastructure assets were in line with sort of good practice sort of published by SIPFA. And so, in essence, the combination of the assurance we could get from our testing and the fact that the use of economic lives were considered reasonable meant that even with the information deficits that we had, we were able to conclude that the infrastructure assets were not so materially misstated. In terms of any other points, so there's a detail of the unadjusted audit differences on page 23 with a table just setting these out. Again, these haven't changed on the version which would have originally been presented to this committee. And as I mentioned at the start, it's around 12% of the overall sort of materiality, which is relatively small, I think it's fair to say, in terms of a overall rate of unadjusted errors. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, Steve, just in terms of sort of VFM or other matters.
I guess the the only thing to draw members' attention to, which we have reported to this committee before and had some quite long discussions on, is just around our value for money conclusion, and we've issued an accept for, or we will issue an accept for value for money conclusion, primarily around the council's procurement arrangements in respect of a particular contract. This committee at the time received assurances from officers around the proposals that, or the processes that had been adopted to address those weaknesses. So I don't, in my view, there isn't an ongoing weakness for the council to address, but our opinion is at a point in time, and so we do report an adverse or an accept for conclusion around that. But I don't think there's anything further I want to draw attention to.
Okay, thank you both. Members, Councillor Van Dolkum.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for the running through that. I just wanted to make one point anyway. On your page 16, you talk about the valuation of the pension liability, and I think there's quite an error there in that. In the paragraphs 5, one matter arising from the pension fund, and that's the Essex pension fund, of which Braintree is a member. The pension fund auditor review of pension fund investments relates to the fund's direct property investments, valued at £397 million. Well, 397 million would indeed be the value of the fund. I say this because I am on the board or one of the boards of the pension fund, but it's certainly not direct property. Property indirectly through Aviva property funds is about 10%. The rest is in mutual funds and bonds, etc. So I think you need to take a look at that. It doesn't make things any worse. In fact, I would suggest it makes it better, in that the pension contributions of Braintree staff are indeed, I believe, well protected by being in a very diversified fund. And I would also like to ask I can't remember which page it is, but you talk about £3.3 million worth of depreciation. Is that typically depreciation of vehicles or buildings? It's quite a lot of money. Just a general question, if I may.
I can't remember exactly what the split is. I expect it's a mixture of both.
Okay. Sorry.
Councillor Walsh.
Thank you. I have a question in two parts. It relates to paragraph 3.2 of the Head of Finance's introductory report, and partly to BDO and maybe partly to Phil Myers. In paragraph 3, we have touched on this at subsequent meetings, but given that this is relating to 2019-20, it would be good just to get a bit of a refresh. Why did BDO suggest an except for in the use of resources previously identified in relation to strategic investment projects, and was that Horizon 120? Why did you say that? And then maybe to Phil Myers, there is a reference here addressed through an action plan. Can I just have confirmation, partly aide-memoire, that all of those issues have since been resolved? Thank you.
So, the adverse, the except for value for money conclusion does relate to the Horizon 120. The Manor Square scheme, and it was the contracting arrangements that were in place to let the contract to your main contractor for that. So it was the weaknesses in the arrangements to let that contract and then subsequently monitor it. So that was what led to the except for qualification there. There was then, and I can't remember the exact date, but there was a very detailed report that was brought to this committee that set out all of the steps that the council had taken to address those weaknesses, and there was a number of steps around increasing capacity within the procurement and contract monitoring teams, and we were satisfied that those arrangements had addressed the weaknesses that we had identified.
Phil, would you like to come back as well?
Yeah, so as was mentioned, so the weakness was identified, and there was quite a comprehensive report to this committee on this. So it had actually been identified by ourselves. We'd actually, because we were embarking on the strategic investment projects, we had actually commissioned our own independent audit of procedures, and that's picked up the issue in the first place, which obviously in reviewing what was then reported through to committee is when obviously BDO then obviously picked that up and was pertinent to their value for money review. So there was quite a comprehensive action plan that was put in place, and I know the Corporate Director for Growth attended the meeting and explained everything to the committee. We've had, subsequent to that, we've had the same independent auditor come in and do like a post implementation review of that action plan, and that's already, again, I believe has been reported through to this committee that the actions that had been identified had all been addressed and put in place.
Councillor Jeffreys.
Thank you. It's a very nice report, but I don't know about other members, but I find them quite difficult to read on the computer, and I just wondered if sometimes we couldn't have a hard copy. I know that we want to, not spend loads of money, but even if there was one just in the members' room that we could actually just pick up and touch. Because sometimes like today, when we've been flipping backwards and forwards different pages on the iPads and everything, it's actually quite difficult to read. And there are other documents as well, and especially when they have got things next to each other, it's actually quite difficult to read. And I just wonder, it's not really a question of to the audit. As such, but it's just I just find it quite difficult to read. I don't know if other members have the same problem. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's been noted. We can look into that for future meetings. Thank you. Councillor Ball.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question to Phil Myers, please. The point in my question is the weaknesses that were discovered with regard to the Manor Street contract. Were those to have been discovered, and were the audit been delivered in a timely manner when it was originally due, would there have been a possibility that practices could have been changed during the lifetime of that contract?
I think the specific issues, as was said, I think was around one of the procurement of the consultants, and I think that was sort of picked up and addressed sort of post probably the progression of the project. So I don't think there was necessarily an opportunity. I think it's almost like a retrospective review of what had actually happened, and therefore the lessons learned have actually been addressed in the subsequent projects, and that, I think that's been proven, as I said, through the independent review that we've had, and also obviously the external auditors' subsequent review around our arrangements in respect to their value for money work.
Could I just extend that question then? Could that have been usefully applied to other projects since? Could there have been some improvements in value for money and in practices? Had that been picked up sooner?
Well, as I said, I believe when the issue had been picked up, I think we were able to, as we say, procedures were tightened up around procurement, and that that those tighter procedures were used on subsequent procurements around some of the other strategic investment projects. So I think the lessons were learned and they were adopted. I don't know the exact timeline and choreograph of the issue being raised and what projects were about at the time, but certainly know that the posts, the reviews we've had independently on the other subsequent strategic projects didn't find the same issue.
Okay, thank you. Any other members wish to ask any questions? Okay, thank you, members. So we're asked to note the following. So bear with me. There are four things that we're asked to note for this evening. So the first one is the external auditor's revised audit completion reports of the 2019-20 accounts. The second is the final statement of accounts for the 2019-20 as amended with the agreement of the external auditor, and the chair of governance will be published on the council's website following receipt of the final audit opinion. And then the third one is the verbal update from BDO on the 2020-21 audit. And then finally, the existing delegations in place for myself, the chairman, to deal with any final matters relating to the 2021 audit. So please can I take it that these have been noted and show by an indication of hands, please. Thank you, members. We will now say goodbye to Steve and Sebastian, as I appreciate coming out tonight, but I know that you've got quite a long journey to get back home. So thank you ever so much for coming to tonight's committee meeting. And we will now proceed to agenda item 7, which is KPMG value for money risk assessment. So I'll just pause for a moment as we say goodbye to both Sebastian and Steve. So agenda item 7 is set out on pages 78 to 89 of tonight's agenda. And for this item, we are joined by both Emma Larkham, a director at KPMG, and Mark Twyford, who is an audit manager, who will be presenting this report this evening. So welcome to Emma and Mark, and please can I invite you to set out this report this evening.
If I just, I think, just start one, just to give you a bit of context as to what this report is sharing, because I appreciate the first time the committee has seen one of our reports, and the value for money sort of scope of work has changed slightly from what you will have seen previously. So the report that you've got in front of you today is setting out to you sort of our approach to value for money, and I think what is important for members just to remember is that when we talk about value for money, what we are talking about and the things that we are asked to consider is around the arrangements in place to achieve value for money, and that's quite important. It is around the processes, procedures, controls that are in place across the authority for the authority to enable it to achieve value for money. It is not necessarily for us to say value for money has been achieved or hasn't. So it's around looking at processes and I say those controls. There's 3 key domains that we look at. So the first one is around financial sustainability. So when we talk about financial sustainability, this is around how does the authority sort of manage its finances, what are the processes in place for setting a budget, challenging a budget, looking at aspects such as how sort of assumptions have been built into that sort of financial position, and how has any sort of risk associated to that financial position been identified and escalated across the authority. The second area that we look at is around governance. So how does the authority make decisions? How is it making the right level of informed decisions? Are they making decisions based on the correct basis, following the correct procedures that are across the authority? And the third aspect is the longest one, so improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And this is really sort of saying, actually, what mechanisms does the authority have to make sure that the when it is spending that money, that it is doing so effectively? And key things we look at and here is around some of the procurement processes and controls, and also understanding if you do have areas such as sort of transformational changes or identifying savings, how again is that process managed? And again, just remembering there, it's not necessarily saying, well, you did achieve X amount of savings. It's around saying, actually, you said you were going to do this. How did you do that? If you thought you were coming off track, how did you report that? How did you manage that? So that's sort of the three key areas. And the way that we sort of get that understanding, we've set out just on page 3 of our report, or page 82 of the full pack. So there's a few things that we look at. So we really take the time to understand the arrangements we've got in place, so understanding some of the sort of key financial processes. We've had Mark can tell you, lots of discussions with the authority this year across the full exec team to make sure that we've really understood how things work, not just in one department but across the whole authority. And we do also look at sort of other aspects to give us assurance. So we'll look at internal audit reports and other sort of external regulatory reports. And then I think the other thing, just which is slightly different, is what we are doing in this report is identifying what we call a significant risk. So this is where the new sort of guidance leads us to say, are there any areas, once we've done that sort of initial look at everything, that we think there might be a slightly more heightened risk of a potential weakness in arrangements, and therefore draws us to do a little bit more work in that area. And that's what this report is telling you today. It's saying that we've done that initial look at everything, and actually we've identified, and Mark will touch on the 2 areas that we've identified, which we just think we want to have a look at to say, are we really comfortable that those arrangements are robust, and that we would then report back to you in February to say, actually, we've done this additional work now, and actually have I concluded that there is or isn't a weakness. So just the fact that we have identified a risk at this point does not mean that I am saying that there is a problem in those arrangements. It's just saying it's something I want to go and have a bit more of a look at to make sure I'm comfortable that everything is as it should be. And throughout this process, we may well identify some areas to recommend for some strengthening of some controls. And again, just because we recommend something doesn't mean that we think there is a significant problem. It's just around trying to strengthen the arrangements that we've got in place. So that's sort of the broad overview. I just thought that would be helpful just to give you that before we just dive into the findings. But Mark, if you want to just take us through the key findings.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. So I think the first page really to draw your attention to is page 84 of the pack. So page 84 is our summary of risk assessment, and that contains the 2 significant risks that Emma previously mentioned. So again, just to reiterate, this doesn't mean that we found anything particularly wrong in those areas currently. It just means that we will be focusing our work and attention more in the 2 specific areas that we've drawn attention to there. So the first one is in regard to governance, and is in regard to the Wethersfield site and the legal action that's been undertaken there during the year. So we've identified that as an area kind of heightened risk, so we'll be performing more procedures around that. And really and I should probably add to this as well, our procedures are fairly well progressed on this particular area as well. So we'll be assessing the timeline and the extent of the legal action both undertaken and also legal action declined by the council, and we'll be evaluating the decision-making process underlining that action taken and whether this has followed the constitutional requirements of the council. The second risk identified is in regard to improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, and this is really around where we have outsourced contract providers, and it's driven by that kind of broader macroeconomic climate, particularly post-COVID and with the kind of current financial economic climate of the past couple of years. And what we'll be looking at there is in regard to the kind of contract management processes in place at the council. So we'll be considering the provisions for non-recoverability against contracts, and also any changes in contract terms which may indicate a diminished value from contracts, and we'll also be assessing contingency plans put in place by the council to ensure that we can continue to provide relevant services. So that really is kind of our headline piece, but that's not all of the work, obviously, that we've undertaken throughout the VFM risk assessment process. So it's across kind of pages 85, 86, 87, 88 and 89 of the reporting pack. We've split out a summary of the procedures we've performed, split by those three areas of financial sustainability, governance and also improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. I won't run through it all in detail because it's quite extensive, but if I just draw some kind of key highlights out of that. So financial sustainability, we've carried out a fairly thorough review of the processes around budget setting, also the involvement of different service lines within that. So we've tried to incorporate both a kind of inward-facing financial perspective on that, but also tried to include some of the outward-facing service lines as well, so we can get a perspective of how everybody is included within that process. I think overall we can conclude that we're satisfied with the processes in place there. There have been some, there's good practice identified in there in terms of regular scrutiny, and nothing particularly to draw attention to that would indicate any concern at this stage, which again I think is shown in the fact that we've not identified a significant risk in that particular area. If I move on to governance, so we've looked at things like the risk register process. We've also looked at things like the documentation and policy process in place at the council, and obviously I think as we just discussed, we've looked specifically at the Wethersfield case as well. In addition to the Wethersfield significant risk that we've identified, we did also identify one recommendation. Now this is not something that we would consider to be a significant risk, and it's not something that we would consider to lead to a significant weakness, but we have documented on page 87 of the report, and we've discussed with Phil and Mark just in regard to some of the key documentation in place, so things like our risk policy, our whistleblowing policies, and some of the other policies that we reviewed in place, that there are a couple of items of best practice that we would recommend to be implemented there. So one of which was, we noticed on review that some of the policies hadn't been updated for a few years, and really across kind of public sector, the best practice that we see there is that on the front page of the document you include a version number and a revision date, and the idea behind that being that a revision date sets in stone when you want to next be considering the policy for revision. We don't consider that to have a significant impact on our VFM procedures because we've reviewed those policies and we've still found them to be effective. In particular, I spent quite a bit of time with Angie running through the whistleblowing cases in the year, and we've been able to assess what's come in, how those have been dealt with, and that process is indeed working effectively. It's more a recommendation from a best practice point of view. And then looking at improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, I think the key one that we'd probably draw attention to here, because it's an example of best practice, so we looked at the policy change process around garden waste. So this is on page 88 of the document, and what we found was there was a quite effective structure in place across the organisation into implementing that. So we identified that it wasn't just the regular levels of governance that were going on. We had a dedicated project team dealing with that. We had project action plans, and not just a project action plan, but an action plan looking at the rerouting of waste routes, a dedicated project risk log, and we also identified usage of financial and peer benchmarking, which is all good practice. We also looked at the call-in process that occurred around that and discussed that with Kim specifically as an area of probably something that doesn't occur very often, but again is an example of best practice. So we wanted to highlight that as an area where that particular process is working well, because VFM shouldn't all be about recommendations. It should also be about highlighting where there is best practice occurring too. And again, we've covered the risk we've identified there in regard to the contract management. So I won't go into that in any further detail, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you ever so much, Emma and Mark. Are there any questions? Councillor Walsh?
Thank you for the level of reporting, both holistically and in detail. Could I just ask you to say a little bit more about the issues concerning Wethersfield? I mean, it's an unusual situation, but can you or maybe our head of finance give us some indication of how much has been spent on the legal challenge, how much has been committed, and how much might be spent, just so that we have an idea of the ballpark? Thank you.
So from our perspective, we are looking at it from a governance point of view. So we'll obviously look at the actual numbers spent as part of the financial statements audit. But from a value for money point of view, the aspect that we're looking at this is to say that this was quite an unusual situation for the authority to find itself in, and we are just considering whether all of the right governance processes has been followed. So in terms of sort of actual costs, that's probably a Phil question for the moment, if that's all right.
I think, as you know, Councillor Walsh, I think we have reported the numbers. I don't have them offhand, but as you know, several 100,000. We full council approved a cap at 300. We never. I don't think we got there. I think the last reported number, I think, was somewhere around 234,000. I seem to remember in the 23, certainly in the 23-24 outturn. So we were within that cap that full council had set in terms of that.
Thank you. Well, maybe go back to KPMG, if I may. So why were you looking at it in terms of governance or value for money? Can you just expand on that a little? I don't want to belabor the point. I'm just trying to understand it.
No, not at all. So again, I think it's just important to remember that what I'm talking around for value for money that we look around is the arrangements in place to make the decisions. So for this one, from a governance perspective, it was an unusual situation for the authority to find itself in. It wasn't a day-to-day type situation. So therefore, one of the things I will look for is to say, is there anything that's slightly unusual that might have followed a different process, or are we comfortable it's followed all the correct governance processes? So it's not about the monetary value that's attached to it. It's about saying, actually, are your governance processes enabling you to make the right decisions? So clearly, there could have been very significant costs involved in any sort of legal challenge. So I'm saying, actually, did you make that decision to get you to the right process? Did you follow your appropriate processes? So it's not sort of a monetary driver that's chosen me to look at this. It's about saying it was one of the things I have to look about is to say, are your governance arrangements in place, the arrangements you have in place to make those decisions appropriate? And this was an unusual sort of line of decision making, so therefore we are just checking that we are comfortable that all of that decision process was followed appropriately, and I say we'll report back on that in February.
Thank you. Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I wanted to cover the same area of study, Wethersfield. I'm wondering how, I've listened to the explanation that Emma has given and Mark. I'm wondering if it's a question of looking at the processes. I think you're probably focusing more on that rather than whether the decisions were right or wrong, and whether they subsequently proved either good or bad value for money. It must be surely something that's very difficult to assess whether or not the decisions were soundly made, because at the top of all this, the main controller is government policy, and government actions, which, as we know, whichever political complexion of government we have, those can change, you know, turn on a sixpence and change from day to day. So what may have been a good risk on Wednesday was a poor risk on Thursday and then change again by Friday. So I'm just wondering, you know, how you wind that into your conclusions.
Yeah. So again, I think you're correct in what you're saying in terms of we're looking at the process that was followed. So it is not my under this jurisdiction in terms of value for money. I'm not considering whether the decision that the council took was right or wrong. I'm saying, did they go through the appropriate process to make that decision? So, i.e., was everybody consulted? Was everybody cited? Was that process in terms of your internal governance followed to enable you to make that decision? The overarching, was that the right thing to do or not, is not what I'm reporting on. It is saying, did you follow the appropriate process to get to that decision?
Thank you, members. If there are no further questions, we're asked to note this report of KPMG of the value for money risk assessment for the financial year ended on the 31st of March 2024. So please can I take it that this report has been noted by raise of hand. Thank you, members. We will now proceed to agenda item 8. But before we do, Emma and Mark, you're more than welcome to stay with us this evening. But I understand if you've got other arrangements to be, you're more than welcome to leave at this point as well.
I'll stay.
Okay, thank you very much. So agenda item 8 is our key financial indicators. And this is set out on page 90 to 97 of tonight's agenda. And for this report, I'll be inviting Phil Myers to set this report out.
So, this report covers two aspects. So it's providing the key financial indicators that you'll be familiar with that we report on at every meeting, and those as at the end of August. And it also, from a financial point of view, makes the committee aware of the first quarter financial review that was carried out. And the forecast budget outturn that was made at that time. So in terms of the budget, at quarter one, we've overall we're reporting a positive variance of £1.4 million, and that's summarised in the appendix to the report, Appendix A, which sets that out by service area. We tend to look at the variances across three sort of themes. So staffing expenditure, other expenditure and income. In terms of staffing expenditure, we're projecting that across the services themselves, there would be a projected underspend of £351,000. The budget does include a vacancy allowance of 300,000, so the 351 was effectively achieving or more than achieving that vacancy allowance. What we've also had to make provision for, though, is the estimated additional cost of the staff pay award, which would be paid from April 2024. So the current offer that's been made by the employers does mean that what we'd provided in the original budget will be a little short, and therefore we're making provision for £186,000. So when combined, we find that the overall staffing budgets at the moment are forecast to exceed budget by 200,000. But say the main reason for that is the pay award, and that's still yet to be confirmed. In terms of other expenditure, so this is mainly non-staffing related expenditure, we are forecasting to be slightly below budget, around £26,000, although as you'd expect there are unders and overs within that position. The main, I suppose, the main reason or the main driver of the positive position is really around income, and the two areas, particularly treasury management, where we've seen an increase in interest and dividend income, and that's primarily due to the rise in interest rates that we've had. That at the time we set the 24-25 budget, we actually anticipated the rates as where they were going to end, but also cash balances that we've been managing has been higher than we were expecting. And the second area was around the green waste subscription service, where you'll probably be aware that demand for that service exceeded what we had originally expected. So the original business case was perhaps pitched on a fairly prudent basis, and that was taking evidence from across other authorities that had done similar. But what we've seen is that service has clearly been one that's created demand. So those were two areas where we had extra income. We are forecasting an underachievement of income in our sustainable development, particularly around planning applications. And I think a lot of that is around market conditions, so it can be quite volatile and change quite quickly from quarter on quarter. So there is a more detailed commentary that's linked in through this report, through to this cabinet report, which gives a little bit more detail behind those. But those are the sort of main reasons we're projecting that £1.4 million. In terms of the key financial indicators, I'll just just highlight some of these. In terms of capital programme, so we've got a programme at the moment that totals 14.1 million, of which 8.7 million we're expecting to be spent in 24-25. And at the end of the first quarter, we actually spent £1 million of that, which is not untypical. That we would, the spend would be relatively low early in the financial year. We are projecting a positive variance on capital of £443,000, although that is subject to some of the larger projects being formally closed down. In terms of capital receipts, we've had 2 land sales that completed, and that generated just over £700,000. I think the notable thing on capital receipts at the moment is right to buy receipts, which we receive through arrangements we have with Eastlight, continue to be impacted by the slowdown in the housing market. So we had actually no sales completed in the first quarter, which is pretty unusual. We know there are sales that are in pipeline, so those may come through in subsequent quarters as mortgage rates are now expected to moderate. In terms of letting of our property commercial, the occupancy rate remains still fairly robust, so at over 90%, 94%. Where we're a little bit down at the moment is on council tax collection. So at the end of August, the rate of 47.4 was just a bit shy of what we were achieved last year. Now, there are 2 factors which are playing into that. Last year, you'll recall, we did paid a dividend. The authority paid a dividend which was credited to all council tax accounts at the time of billing. So that, in a sense, did slightly distort the collection rate for last year. What we would expect is that the impact of that will lessen as we go through the year. So we're expecting that to come through in future reports. And I think the second bit was around the levies that we now place on empty property. So part of the 24-25 budget, we changed the policy there so that levies are now introduced from 1 year, unless there are certain circumstances which apply, in which case they're exempted, as opposed to 2 years. So that has actually increased some of the collectible debt. I think the thing to note there is we're not unique. In Cross Essex, collection rates have dipped from last year, and it's probably a signal around continuing pressure on household budgets. We were actually above the Essex average, so that's positive. I think the other positive bit is on business rates, where collection rate is higher than last year. I think the other thing I'd just highlight is around the write-offs. So just mentioned in the report there, we have been doing a review of some of our aged debt, so you'll probably see that the level of write-off has increased from what we had at the same period last year. That said, what we're writing off is still relatively small compared with what we actually collect. I think the write-offs equate to about 0.1% of the collectible debt in terms of both council tax and business rates. So no concerns there. We do make provision, and like most organisations would, for non-collection. And often those write-offs relate to circumstances where clearly there's limited circumstances where we could collect that debt. So, for example, liquidations, insolvencies, and the like. And I think I just wanted to highlight or just correct an error in the report, 3.411. So it talks about the supplier payment numbers. It says 4560. It should actually read 4506. So there's just a typo error there, where the 6 and the 0 are the wrong way round. So, but 98.1% is the percentage, which is slightly off target at the moment. But we are working with services on trying to get back on track there. We know there's been a fair amount of churn within some of our services, and particularly where there are a lot of supplier payments. So the finance team are working with those areas to make sure that they're clear on the processes that they need to follow there. I won't say anything around the treasury management bit, because I know there's a separate report on that, which I think Mark will pick up later. So I think that can be left till then.
No, thank you, Phil, for a very thorough report. So, members, do we have any questions? Councillor Wright?
The overspend on the pay award of 200,000, is that just for the first quarter, or is that going to be repeated every quarter?
So the provision we've made there is for the full year impact of that pay award. So if the pay award settled as is proposed, we don't anticipate that. You know, that is roughly what the impact will be on the 24-25 financial year. And as we're now moving into preparing for 25-26, we're taking the ongoing impact of that into account, so that we've got the position corrected going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Ball?
Yes, thank you. It's a question for Phil. I'm not sure, in fact, whether this is an legitimate audit question or not, but is it possible for councils to sell their debts, and do they have any marketable value, or is this completely forbidden?
No, it's not generally the case that local authorities, essentially factor their debts. I mean, so in the way that you're suggesting.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Van Dolken.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Phil. I could just ask you a question on Appendix A, your Appendix A, the business plan services. Okay, finance, you show a budget, an updated budget for the year of thousand, but forecast spend is in fact a positive 51,000. What kind of money is in that? What kind of funds are they?
So that is where we capture the investment income.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. So finance is part of part of the finance function is to manage the treasury investments. So that's where it's captured in the report. So.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that one. Do any members have any questions? Okay, thank you, members. So we're asked to note the key financial indicators. Oh, sorry, was there Councillor Ramage? Sorry, Councillor Ramage.
Just, thank you, Chair. Just one query, it hasn't sort of come up, but regarding staff working from home, does that put a different reflection on the building as such with, you know, office space, etc.? Are we planning to downsize the building, you know, like we did a few years back? I mean, I'm just wondering, you know, how does that take into consideration? Or is there any extra cost involved with staff working from home, i.e. equipment, that sort of thing?
So no, I mean we're providing people with laptops and that, so they are able to work in office and at home. We're not providing, you know, dual office equipment for people, but I'm sure members have been made aware of the Agile and Flexible project, which is part of the Fit for Future transformation programme, and that is around how we address the working arrangements within the building to accommodate the new ways of working and the hybrid working of staff. And you'll know, aligned to that is we've been working quite hard, and our estates people, to try and utilise the vacant space we've got by trying to offer that to external tenants as where we can, but that's obviously proven quite difficult.
Thank you, Phil. So we're asked to note the key financial indicators as of the 31st of August 2024 and the first quarter financial review and forecast budget outturn for the financial year 2024-25. And so can I please take it that this report has been noted? Thank you, members. So this report has been noted, and we will now proceed to agenda item 9, which is the internal audit update, including progress against the 2024-25 internal audit plan. So members, this report can be found on pages 98 to 108 of tonight's agenda. And can I invite Angie Mitchell, our Insurance and Fraud Manager, to set out this report.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So this report confirms the progress in relation to the 24-25 internal audit plan, and also confirms that we have had no applications in respect of RIPA, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, or the Investigatory Powers Act since the last report, or indeed for the year to date. So the progress against the plan, there are 4 items completed since the last report to this committee. They're summarised in paragraph 3.1.2, and a summary of the outcome of those reports is in Appendix 1, which is from page 105 of your reports. They were all either significant or full assurance, so nothing to draw to your attention on those. The overall progress against the internal audit plan is summarised in Appendix 1 on page 102, and so a number of items completed and a number more in progress. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Angie. Any members got any questions of Angie this evening? Councillor Van Dolken.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Angie. In your list of 3 completed audits, or 4, is it, on page 98, 99, operator license compliance, external source of assurance. What's that, please?
So some of the work that we do is to place reliance on other sources of assurance rather than duplicating the work in an area that we consider is important, and obviously the service considers is important as well. So if there's a suitably independent and suitably comprehensive review by an external competent body, then it's good for us to review that as a source of assurance. So we do that in a number of areas, this being one, various checks on cybersecurity arrangements being another.
Sorry, if I may come back. So,
Yep, feel free.
Operator license. So this is software, is it? Oh.
Apologies, I didn't realise that's what you're asking. So
well,
no,
yeah.
it's the operator licence, so the fleet management
Fleet
arrangements.
management, okay.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Thank you. And Councillor Ramage.
Yeah, just when you're negotiating the renewal for 2024, are you doing it with just one insurer, or are you going to a number of insurers?
Thank you, Councillor Ramage. So we're talking about insurance. So the 2024 renewal is the last year of the long-term agreement, and we have covers with a number of different insurers. Sorry, second.
Is that a 3-year policy?
It's the fifth year. Yeah. Okay. So we have policies with a number of different insurers, and they were determined at the tender in 2020. So we will be completing a new tender exercise for insurances starting October 2025. So we'll be doing that in the earlier part of 2025.
Just for your interest, is the rates of insurance gone up quite a bit in the time?
So under the long-term agreement, there haven't been so many changes in rates. Obviously, the rating factors affect some of the premium pricing. There were some rate changes associated with the motor policy which were accounted for at the tender. So the bid made allowance for a change in premium on the basis of the loss ratio. And on the liability insurance, there were some increases applied. But yeah, apart from that, the rating factors are the things that change the premium.
Sorry, Chair, just one other question. I mean, what's been our claims record on over that 5 years? Has it been reasonably good?
There's been some variation. Councillor Ramage, would it be helpful for me to talk about the detail with this outside the meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Angie. And thank you, members. So we're asked to note the performance and progress against the 2024-25 internal audit plan. So, members, please can I ask that this report has been noted? Thank you very much. So, as this report has been noted, we will now proceed to agenda item 10, which is an update of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 and Investigatory Powers Act 2016. So this is set out on page 109 and 102, 123 of tonight's agenda. And again, I'll be asking Angie to set out this report.
Thank you, Chair. So as the Chair introduced, this is the RIPA and IPA policy update. We've made some changes to the policy since it was presented to this committee last year, and those changes are summarised in paragraph 3.3 on page 110. So general references to the IPA Act reflect the amendment to that Act. Web links have been updated. One authorising officer has been updated to the new post holder. Authorisation levels and durations have been clarified, and approval of IPA applications now reflects that those applications go to the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office following the merger of that office with the Office for Communications Data Authorisations. and then the definitions have been extended. Chair, again, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Any questions, members? Okay, nope, seems quite straightforward. So we are looking to approve this recommendation this evening. So what I will be asking for is a proposer to move the recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Ramage. And we're also looking for a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Prime. So the recommendations have been moved and seconded. I'll now put this to the vote. All those in favour, please indicate by show of hands. Thank you, members. That is unanimous. The recommendation has been approved. So as this has been approved, we will now proceed to agenda item 11, the Treasury Management Mid-Year Report for 2024-25. And this is set out on pages 124 to 130. So please can I invite Mark Jarvis, the Financial Services Manager, to set out his report.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So this report sets out the mid-year position of the Council's Treasury Management activities and gives members the opportunity to review before it's submitted to full Council. Now, the report is broken down into various sections and I'll highlight some of the main areas. So we start off with the external context. Obviously, this is fairly topical at the moment. CPI has dropped down to 2.2%, which is obviously nearer to the 2% target set by the Bank of England, which obviously is positive. However, there are some underlying inflationary pressures obviously impacting inflation, including energy prices and obviously wage growth across the public and private sector. With the increase in inflation, we've also seen the Bank of England reduce its base rate in September from 5.25% down to 5%. With the uncertainties over the global economic outlook, it is uncertain how quickly further reductions will take place from the Bank of England, and it has been, I think the term used is sticky, over the course of the year, and the bank rate has not reduced as much as expected back when we set the strategy back in November, December time. With regards to borrowing, obviously the reduction in base rate has no impact on our external borrowing. Obviously it's a fixed rate loan that we took out in 2022. The council's borrowing currently stands at 5.2 million, a decrease of 200k from the start of the year. This loan is on a EIP basis, which stands for Equal Instalment of Principal, which is similar to a repayment mortgage that obviously anyone taking out a loan for their property. So as part of this, we're not anticipating to make any further borrowing this year, and we expect external borrowing to be at 5 million by year end. For context, in section 4.4, there is a section on there about the rates if we was to borrow this year. So in the first half, rates ranged from 4.8% up to 5.4%, so quite substantially higher than what we took out in 2022. If I move on to investments, obviously with our investments, the primary objective is for security and liquidity. And however, our current investments are achieving an average rate of 4.91%, and this has contributed to the surplus as indicated in the Key Performance Indicators report earlier this evening. Under section 5.1, you've got a breakdown of where our investments are. So as at the 31st of August, we had £76.5 million, which includes 19 million of pooled funds, which I'll come back to in a minute, 31.5 million held within the Debt Management Office, and those deposits are less than 3 months. And we had 25.5 million in our money market funds, which are funds that are available next day. With regards to pooled funds, these stood at 22.4 million, which is £3.4 million higher than what we invested back in 2016-2017. Obviously, these investments do fluctuate on a daily basis, so that was a snapshot at that moment in time. The last comment I was going to mention is in regards to section 7, which is in regards to the statutory override, which we have taken to committee before. So obviously this is quite a complex area, but if I just try to summarise it, under the current regulations, with our pooled funds, if there's any fluctuations from year on year, these are kept in an unusable reserve, so therefore they're not impacting the council's budgeting or forecasting until such time as those investments are actually realised or sold. Next year, the statutory override will cease, and therefore any gains and losses will impact the council's income expenditure statement. However, the council holds a treasury reserve which is used to mitigate these fluctuations. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Mark. Does any member have any questions for Mark this evening? Councillor Ramage.
Yeah, it's encouraging to see the investment funds, but do you review these on a monthly basis, or how often do you refer to them? In other words, if something's not performing, do you review it and take advice on move it into another investment fund?
So our pooled fund investments are there for long term. So we have Arlene Close who monitor these funds for us, and they provide us with monthly reports on the performance of these funds. Obviously, if there is anything untoward or anything for us to be aware of, they do contact us the same day. In terms of our short-term investments, obviously that's part of our cash flow, and obviously they're short-term deposits.
Okay. If there are no further questions, we are recommended submission of the Treasury Manager Mid-Year Report 2024-25 to full council. So please can I have a proposer to move this recommendation? Councillor Van Dolken, and can I also have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ball. So all those in, as the recommendation has been moved and seconded, I will now just put this to the vote. So all those in favour, please indicate by a show of hands. Thank you, members. That is unanimous. So the recommendation has been approved this evening. So as this has been approved, we will now proceed to agenda item 12, the Governance and Audit Committee Annual Reports. So this has been set out on pages 131 to 149 of tonight's agenda. And I will be presenting this report as Chairman of the Committee. So the annual report of the Governance and Audit Committee summarises the committee's work and achievements relating to its audit role for 2023 to the year 2024 and up to August 2024. It is intended to do two things: to reassure the Council and other stakeholders that the committee is undertaking its responsibilities properly and in a way which allows it to be exercise effective oversight, and secondly, demonstrate to the district's residents and other stakeholders the importance that the Council places on good governance, openness and probity in public life. The report sets out the contribution the committee makes to achieving those aims, and the committee's meetings are open to the public and its reports are available on the Council's websites. To provide ongoing assurance over the Council's internal controls and systems, the committee meetings in 2023 to 2024 were attended by the Chief Executive, Corporate Director, Head of Finance, the Audit, Insurance and Fraud Manager, the Financial Services Manager and Committee Services, as well as representatives, as we've seen tonight, from BDO, KPMG, which are the Council's external auditors. Other Council officers attend the committee meeting also as required. Operating effectively, the work of the Governance and Audit Committee will enhance corporate awareness of the need for internal control and implementation of agreed audit recommendations, increase public confidence in the objectivity and fairness of the financial and other reporting, reinforce the importance and independence of internal and external audits and other similar review processes, and provide additional assurance for its processes of independent and objective review. I would like to express my thanks to those officers and members who have supported the work of this committee, particularly Phil Myers, Angie Mitchell and Mark Jarvis, for presenting, discussing but also challenging reports and engaging in training and improvement activities to develop the knowledge and skills needed in the area of the Council's arrangements for effective governance. So I'd just like to, rather than go through every item, as it is quite an extensive report, but I'd just like to, on page 100 and I believe, starts on 141 and rolls over onto page 142, is just to like to point out and thank members for their attendance at committee meetings. I think this table shows, particularly since the new administration in after May 2023 with this new committee, just how well these meetings have been attended. So thank you for all of your input into those meetings, because I certainly feel that the reports do get good scrutiny and good oversight. So thank you for your contributions to that. As I said, I don't intend to go through the rest of the report as it's been widely available for some time, but I'm open to ask any questions or if anybody wishes to speak on this item. Councillor Ramage.
Yeah, I would just like to say, I think the committee, as you pointed out, has been well attended, but it's also been well chaired as well from your good self. So I thank you for that.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. Thank you very much. Councillor Van Dolken.
Just thank you, Chair. Just a small point of duty of detail. Councillor Heath, in fact, he mentioned that he wasn't here tonight. His name isn't actually included on the list right at the beginning of the agenda, the list of participants.
Chair, if I could just step
Yes.
in. We have picked that up, Councillor
Okay.
Van Dolken. Do offer our apologies. There was an error on our system when printing the agenda, but we have picked that up and we will amend it for the next meeting.
Just want to show you something.
No, thank you ever so much for pointing it out. Thank you. So if there are no further questions, we've been asked to review the committee's draft 2023-24 annual report and to determine any changes prior to its submission to full council. So please can I take it this report has been reviewed and accepted, and please show by raising your hands. Thank you, members. The report has been accepted. We will now proceed to agenda item 13, the annual report of the monitoring officer for the year 2023-24. So this report has been set out tonight on pages 150 to 153 of the agenda. And please can I invite, and thank you for being patient this evening, Emma Wisby, our Legal and Governance Manager and Deputy Monitoring Officer, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members. And first of all, I'd like to start with giving Kim's apologies. She would have liked to have been here with us this evening, but unfortunately, family commitments meant that I was made available. So members, what you've got before you is a short report. It is reflecting over the work that Kim and I have been undertaking as your monitoring officers over the year 2023-24. Members, as you are aware from previous reports, it is the role of the monitoring officer to be the proper officer for receiving complaints in respect to the Code of Conduct, the guardian of the Constitution, and to be there to support members regarding their interests, how they participate in meetings, and for general advice on good governance. Members, as you're aware, as being members of full council, you agreed a new constitution back in April 21, and that was re-established with its review, which took place in the beginning of 2023 in the new administration. It is part of the monitoring officer's role to keep the constitution up to date, and we do that through a number of methods, which is direct engagement with members through the DGG and taking the constitution to full council for its approval. So May 25th of 2023, you agreed a new constitution, and essentially with that revisions, we were reordering the items of business to ensure there was good flow of business at committee meetings and full council. It also reflected the changes in our committee structures, and it also brought in some new process enabling members to ask questions of the leader in the cabinet during full council. And we also did a revision of the allocations of the motions processes to make sure that all political parties of the organisation had an opportunity to bring those matters through the full council processes. So, in addition to the new constitution, members have also recently adopted a new code of conduct. The previous code of conduct had been in place for a number of years and was serving us well. But as members will know through the work of the LGA and the work through other Essex authorities, all authorities were encouraged to adopt the model code as put forward by the LGA. Now, initially, we were hoping that through the Essex authorities working together, that we could make small minor tweaks to the LGA model code to make a Essex code, but due to small differences through other authorities and people working at different pace, a lot of authorities, including ourselves, adopted the LGA code as produced by them. And certainly from a monitoring officer perspective, that makes our lives a bit easier because we are working with a single code. We're also working with a number of parish councils to see if they are prepared to adopt the LGA code. From our conversations with parish clerks, we are aware that a number have already adopted the model code. So certainly for a large part of our districts, we have a single code at county level, district level and at parish level. Some other parishes have maintained their own codes which they devise, which they're entitled to under the Localism Act. Others have maintained their existing codes which have been produced by the Association of Local Councils or our former code that we put in place. So with the adoption of the new code, which we did on the 22nd of April 2024, we do have some work arising out of that for this year, but that's not covered by this report. Now, a substantive part of the work of the monitoring officer is dealing with code of conduct complaints. Now, complaints sounds quite aggressive. Quite those things are inquiries. Working with the complaints regime, we work alongside with Essex Police. As members know, the failure to declare a DPI is a criminal matter which the monitoring officer, upon receipt of such complaint, has to refer to Essex Police to investigate. We don't have jurisdiction over that. But I'm pleased to inform the committee that we've had to make no referrals to Essex Police in respect of any member at district or parish level in failing to declare a DPI. The other area which we deal with is the complaints where members have failed to comply with the Code of Conduct as adopted by their authority. And I'm pleased to inform members that with the work that we do with the parish councils and giving advice to members at district and parish level, we have had 4 formal complaints in that 12-month period. One complaint has led to a decision notice against a district councillor, and that has been published on the council's website, and that remains on the website for a period of 12 months. The 3 other matters were found to not be in breaches of the code. A number of issues that are raised through code of conduct complaints mainly relate to behaviours of individual councillors during meetings or through social media postings, failure to declare interest and treating others with respect. I'm pleased to advise that the work that we do with at parish level and district level, we do actually head off a lot of concerns. We are pleased that members here particularly engage with the monitoring officer and myself to take advice early in their consideration of business items, so we're able to give members sound advice so they know how to participate in meetings and where they should be stepping out. We have rejected a number of inquiries and pre-complaints on the basis they are matters that simply do not fall within the monitoring officer's jurisdiction. And some of those matters relate to complaints where individuals are unhappy with decisions of the authority at district and parish level, or where there are, in fact, employment issues within the parishes. So we've rejected quite a few of those this year. I'm also pleased to advise the committee that we've not made any referrals to the standard subcommittee. So where a complaint has gone through the assessments process and there has been a finding of a breach of the code, we're obliged to refer the matter to the standard subcommittee, and for this authority we've not had to make such referrals. Another area which we maintain for members is your registers of interest. Now, as you're aware, as members, you have a legal obligation to have a register of interest, and that also applies to our parish members as well. Your register of interest sets out all your disclosable peculiar interests, your non-pecuniary interests, and any interests which the regulations state that you should declare. In respect of members' interests, we've had no request for dispensation for participating in the meetings because of their interests. So members have been managing their interests upon taking advice from the monitoring officer or myself. We are also obliged to publish the registers of interest so they're available for an inspection, and I'd have to say in terms of public inquiries and members' interest, it's been low level inquiries, normally wishing to be signposts to make sure that things are appearing to be as they should be. And it is the responsibility of the councils to ensure that the registers of interest are kept up to date. But as you are aware from emails from myself, we do periodically remind you to keep your registers up to date. And we've had to take no issues forward when members have failed to include matters which should appear on their registers of interest. Certainly just picking up a point, working with the auditors, it's actually something that I work with the auditors at the end of every year to make sure that everything that you've got on your registers feeds through to the auditing process. So whilst it meets your obligations under the Localism Act, it also helps auditing colleagues to know that we've got matters declared properly for when it's picked up and investigated by our external auditors. Members, as you appreciate, I'm unable to discuss any particular code of conduct complaint because they are subject to the rules of confidentiality. However, I'm more than happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
Very much, Emma. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you very much, Emma, for standing in and indeed for the work of your colleague Kim in what at times is a sensitive area. You and I'm on a parish council, as a number of us will be. I don't think it's necessary to declare that, it's publicly known. You made an interesting point earlier on about the LGA code and that a number of parishes in our district have adopted it. Have you any idea how many have adopted it, and if you can remind me how many parish councils we've got?
Okay, so we have 52 town and parish councils. At the moment, I don't have the precise figure of the number of parishes who have adopted the LGA code. However, it's a piece of work that we are doing in this current year. Following on from the council adopting the LGA code, we're setting up the training for members for that, but we're also then going to roll that out to the parish councils, and parish councillors have also adopted the LGA code. So we will know, hopefully in the next few weeks, how many parishes have taken up the LGA code.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just on a point of information, there's a reference made to the independent person.
Yes,
Am I right in thinking, by definition, we shouldn't know the identity of that person? I believe they're going to continue to the end of, is it March next year?
Yes, apologies, members. Yes, so we do have an independent member. That's a requirement of the standards regime under the Localism Act, that the monitoring officer has an independent person to consult when considering complaints. So there's like there's an observer on the handling of the complaint. Layla Crow is our independent person. Her identity isn't secret because her appointment was confirmed by full council. And yes, she kindly agreed to extend for 1 year. We've worked very closely with Layla and we've been very successful with that work that we've done with her. What makes life a lot easier with working with Layla, because she's got a background in governance herself, so she understands how local authorities work and the types of regimes that authorities have to observe directly or indirectly. So apologies for missing out details about Layla.
Councillor Hooks.
Thank you, Emma. It's to do with the Code of Conduct and Training. You have touched on it now, but I think there was an email back in April after we had originally agreed the Code of Conduct, saying that then there was a possibility of training for week commencing 17th of June. So obviously that never happened, and I appreciate thinking about it. That was the point of the time the election was called and everything probably went a little bit different. But obviously I think, you know, as a council we're waiting for that training, and I think many parish councils are waiting on that training. For example, my own parish hasn't proceeded with the LGA because obviously they're waiting for training. So how soon is that going to be?
Okay. Yes, unfortunately our plans for training were delayed because of the elections and other matters that Kim and I have had to attend to. You did have training on the Code of Conduct as it was when part of the induction programme. We would have liked to be able to bring the training in quicker after the LGA code was adopted in late spring. So it is our plan to deliver that this side of Christmas, but I'll be writing out. Now, in terms of the parish councillors, now this is where it gets a bit tricky, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but we don't have a legal duty to train parish councils on their codes. But we've always extended our training to parish councillors because we do value that partnership between us and the parish councils and the clerks, because it does make our life easier. So it is our plan to invite the clerks to come in for a training session, and then those parishes which feel it's necessary to have their members will have separate sessions for them, because we feel it's necessary to have a session with the clerks first of all, because matters which clerks and officers might want to discuss may not be things they want to discuss, particularly if they're asking about how do they deal with a particular situation. So it's matters we're going to try and do with our members, certainly before Christmas, and the parishes probably soon after. But I would also just point out the LGA, when they produce their model code, they also produce a comprehensive training guide and notes for any authority who adopted that code. So I'd say in first instance, if parish councillors are, clerks are struggling with understand what the LGA intended by provision of their code, Kim and I are always happy to have that conversation with them, but the LGA also produced its own documentation to support their code.
Thank you, Emma. If there are no further questions, we're asked to note the content of this report, so please can I take it that this report has been noted? Thank you very much, members. This report has been noted, and I can conclude that this item ends our business for this evening. So the next meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee is scheduled to take place on the 27th of November. Please note that this is an additional meeting of the committee that has been arranged in response to the National Audit Backlog and the announcement of the new backstop date. So just hopefully we've got that one all in our diaries. Thank you all for your attendance this evening, and those watching in the Council's YouTube broadcast. I will now close this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee at 9:06, and good night to you all. Thank you very much. Thank you.